This is you. Tonight. Okay. Awesome. Live. Okay. So, Lauren, do you just want to start off by kind of introducing yourself and get us rolling?
Yeah, absolutely. Am I good to demask?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to get started today. It's going to be a really fun combination of a little bit of a, hello?
Oh.
Okay. All right, we're good. Okay, so today we're going to do a little bit of a combination of my background and my story about how I started my business and how it's changed, and also a calligraphy lesson, very introductory. Anybody can do it. And the materials we're going to be working with today, if you're at home and you want to try this, we're just using washable Crayola markers and paper. I'm going to be working up here on the whiteboard just to demonstrate, but you can do this with literally any pen and paper. So it's super simple to do. I think what I'm going to start out by doing is giving you guys a few little tips and things to work on and draw kind of while I talk about my story. So go ahead and pick a color of choice that seems exciting to you, and we'll kind of get going. I'm just going to be working with black dry erase marker up here, but my goal today is to teach you guys something that's called faux calligraphy. It's a really great introductory calligraphy skill to learn, and it gets behind the principles of what calligraphy is, but you don't need any special pens to do it. If you want to start out just by writing your name in cursive, that's where we're really gonna start. So really, really basic, just cursive lettering, making sure you give some space in between your letters because we're going to be going back in and adding in some lines later, but nothing fancy, and you'll have plenty of time to kind of play around with this while I'm talking. But one of the main principles of calligraphy has to do with the difference of thicknesses and lines. And where you're going to want to be adding those thicknesses depends on which direction your pen is moving when you're drawing. So when you're writing out your name, you can kind of retrace over it to figure this out. Anytime you're moving your pen in a downwards direction, that's where we're going to start adding thickness onto the side of the letter. That's what's going to give it that kind of calligraphy look. So like as I'm tracing down on my letter, when I notice I'm moving in a downwards direction, I'm just going to add in that thicker stroke there. As soon as I start curving upwards at all, I'm going to stop and I'm going to keep it nice and thin. And then again, when I'm moving down again, I'm going to make sure I'm adding in that thick stroke. So you can kind of do this really slowly, working with your marker and just noticing how these difference in thicknesses start to give it almost like a three-dimensional look. And you're just going to want to go in and add that for every single letter of your name. And you can play around with how thick you want that line to be, if you want to make it really chunky or if you want to keep it kind of thin. But the really cool difference is when you start to see the difference between the thin and the thicks, that's what's going to start making it look like calligraphy. And this would traditionally be done with the difference in pressure in our pen, but because we're just working with a marker, we're able to kind of manipulate it that way. So if you want to kind of keep practicing and playing around with that, you can try a couple of different words if you'd like. You can try different styles of your cursive if you like, but just start playing around with figuring out where those thick lines need to be. And if you're having trouble figuring out which one is supposed to be thick versus thin, you can also add in arrows for yourself just as a guide. Anytime you're moving downwards, you can just add arrows. When you're moving up, add upwards arrows, and that'll kind of help guide you as far as where the thin and the thicks are supposed to go. But while you're sort of practicing that, I guess I'll go into a little bit about my background and the story behind my business. Calligraphy is like one of the main components of my business, and it's kind of where I started out. I started out with just like a fascination for hand lettering and this art form. I thought it was so cool how you could manipulate letters and create artworks out of it, and you can change the messaging. And I really, really loved that aspect of art. Even though I'd always had an interest in art, I never really knew which direction I wanted to take it or what was going to be my thing. So when I discovered calligraphy and lettering, something just clicked with me. I really, really loved it. And I started just learning everything I could about it, teaching myself. I would watch videos, I would read books about it, and I just became really fascinated with like, how far can I take this? And eventually I started to develop this skill far enough that I could teach other people about it. And, you know, my friends would ask me like, how do you do those cool like lettering in your notebooks or in your journals, or like, show me how you do that. And I was like, I should start making tutorial videos about like how I do my lettering. That could be really interesting to people. And that's really where my business started. I just made a YouTube channel. I started posting these tutorial videos and even just showing me drawing in my journal, and people were fascinated by it. It's so cool because this is such a visual art form. Like as it develops, you want to watch it come together, and it's really cool. I love that about visual arts, is that the process is almost as cool as the end product, and people love to see how calligraphy and lettering happens. So I was able to gain traction on YouTube, and that was really the first sense that I had of like what entrepreneurship feels like, kind of growing something and making money from it, and doing something that was like born out of just a passion, hobby, and skill that I have, and starting to see money come back from that, and realizing like, I want to be a business owner. I love this feeling, and I'm lucky enough to have this skill that I can teach to people. And I really took it from there. The next step for my business was to figure out, how can I actually sustainably monetize my business, not just have a YouTube channel, but actually start teaching in-person workshops. And that was the next direction for my business. I was lucky enough to have a mentor in college who taught me that I could hold these live sessions. She encouraged me to invite some people in and teach them and have it be like a real class. You know, that was so scary to me because I was so nervous about speaking in front of people. But it ended up being a really big step forward for me, learning that like, I'm actually capable of like leading a class of people. And it taught me a lot about marketing and sales. So after getting into the SciStars program, having the summer during college to work on my business and develop it further. You know, I wrote a whole book on calligraphy. I held workshops. I created an online class. Like I was just like trying to dive as deep as I could into this business thing. And I feel like once I like get an idea that I think is good, I want to go at it head on, and I just kind of barrel down that direction. So, you know, I spent this whole summer after my junior year working on this calligraphy class that I built. And I started partnering with local venues who would help me bring in people, because one of the hardest things with classes and teaching is just getting people there and getting the word out. So, you know, I was fortunate to meet a few people along the way who were like, oh, I've been looking for someone who teaches calligraphy. I'd love to have you come teach in my store. And so I was going down this great path. I was super excited. I graduate college, I'm teaching workshops, everything seems to be going great. And then when COVID happens, it was just this huge transition of like, okay, I have to change the way that I'm doing business, because I can't do live classes anymore. And that's what I thought the best direction for my business was going to be. So initially I was teaching online for a little bit. I still had my YouTube channel, and I was also doing some freelance work on the side, because, you know, not only did I enjoy teaching calligraphy and lettering, but I liked doing it. I liked doing signs for weddings. I liked doing wedding invitations, you know, all these different avenues that I had for using my skill. I was able to monetize it that way. And slowly the freelance side of my business was actually the thing bringing in the most income for me. And I decided to lean into that as much as I could. And I actually got the opportunity to paint a calligraphy wall mural at a wedding venue in May of 2020. And that was like such an exciting moment for me, that someone liked my art so much that they were willing to let me put it up on a big wall and pay me for it. That was just so exciting. So after painting that mural last year, I knew like that's the direction I want my business to go. I want to put my art up on big walls. I want to see how far I can take this side of my business. And since teaching doesn't seem to be going as well right now, like this is the perfect time for me to pivot. So that kind of takes us to where I am with my business today. Obviously, I still really enjoy teaching, and it's something that I do whenever I get the opportunity to, and I love to continue developing my public speaking skills. But painting murals has been like the coolest opportunity so far that I feel like I've gotten to take with my business. And I'm continuing in that direction happily right now. So that's a little bit about my background. Hopefully that can be encouraging for any of you guys that are looking to start a business, knowing that like the first thing you try doesn't always have to be the end thing that you end up pursuing forever. Like it can ebb and flow and change, and like that's totally normal. And that's just kind of what happens, like as the landscape of business changes, and also just as your kind of interests change and develop. Like, you know, being this person running a YouTube channel, like from when I was 18 to now I'm about to be 23, like my interests have kind of changed a lot. And so like where I'm able to put my time has changed as well. So maybe we can transition back to a little bit of calligraphy. So I want to show you guys some iterations of this style of faux calligraphy as we're sitting here that you can kind of play around with, so that way you can get creative with it. That's one of the funnest parts about lettering. So we went over the difference between thickening the downstrokes, making sure to leave the upstrokes thinner. There's something called bounce lettering that I kind of want to show you guys how you can play around with, and it has to do with this baseline here, which I didn't really speak about earlier, but you know, another one of the big parts, or like an element of calligraphy, has to do with how you manipulate where your letters sit on this baseline. So one of the things you can start playing around with is, you know, originally I had all of my letters sitting neatly here on one line. I can start to change where the bottoms of my letters are falling, and you can see how it gives a bit of a different feel to the lettering. So you can kind of play with moving them up and down. You can have some sitting up high, some coming down low. That's the style I used up here, this title, where I was creating a little bit of variation in between where the bottoms of my letters were hitting. So that also brings a little bit of a different style to the lettering. It's something you can do without having any fancy pens. You can really shift the mood of, like, maybe if you were creating a sign and you wanted it to be a little bit more fun or a little bit more funky, you know, this could be a style that you could play around with. You can also play around with just leaving these middle parts in between your two lines open. See, like normally you may fill them in to kind of create the look of a brush pen, but you can also leave them open just like this. And that creates a bit of a different feeling. You can also play around with filling them in with patterns. That's something I like to do. So you could do stripes, you could do polka dots. So you can play around with the way that you fill in these spaces in between. You can change it from letter to letter. There's a lot that you can do. You guys also have colored pens. I only have black. So if you wanted to like fill in the spaces in between with maybe like you drew your letter in red and you want to fill in the spaces with orange, you could play around and try something like that. So maybe, you know, while you guys are sitting here, if you want to like try writing out your friends' names or your mom's name, like Mother's Day is coming up. So maybe you want to make your mom like a calligraphy Mother's Day card. So like my mom's name is Gwen. I think also one of the cool things about like once you have this skill, like people are very easily impressed, you'll notice. So like whenever I like write a title or I'm like, you know, writing anything, or if I write someone's name kind of like using the style, they're like, oh, that's so cool. So like you'll now sort of have this skill that you can bring into your daily life. And if you're ever like making a birthday card for someone, or if you're taking notes in class, you want to show off your lettering skills a little bit, you kind of now just have this in your repertoire of different ways you can just play around with lettering. It's like such an easy and quick way that you can just bring some creativity into your life. I also like to do this when I'm writing grocery lists. That's a great time to practice your calligraphy, you know, just using that time to just take things a little bit slower and be really creative. And clearly you don't need like any fancy tools to do this. It's really fun. So Megan, do we want to take this time for questions, or would that be appropriate?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Do you two have any questions? Otherwise I can get things rolling.
Could be about my business. It could be about lettering in particular, like anything.
I have a question. So you said that you did that mural for that wedding last year.
Yeah.
So how are you like promoting your business now, since you want to like go in that direction?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely changed a lot. So the way I was able to get that job was I had been like periodically sharing my artwork online through Facebook, through Instagram. And that's really helpful to let people know that you have that skill. And so someone happened to stumble upon my art. She was looking to hire a local artist. A lot of people love to support local artists. So making sure you're sharing what you do with like your community and your family members is so great, because then they can tell people. And that's how I was able to get that job. She kind of discovered me and she's like, hey, do you paint murals? And in my head, I was like, well, I've never done it before, but it sounds like something I could do just based on my other skills. And I'm like, kind of willing to say yes to anything at this point because I'm so early in my business. So I said, yeah, I can do it. And after that, I realized, yes, this is a skill that I have and I've proven that I can do it. I made sure to document that process along the way. I took tons of pictures, tons of process videos. I showed the process of doing my first mural on my YouTube channel, on my Instagram. So now my audience sees like, oh, you used to do calligraphy. Now I see that you're doing these other types of projects. That shows me that you have a little bit of breadth to what you are capable of doing. So I think whenever you have the chance to document, even just when you're learning something, you don't have to be super proficient in it yet to share it. I think people actually enjoy seeing people go from like novice to expert and seeing what that journey looks like. I think it's been a challenge that I'm still battling with, of like, how much can I share of my process without, the fear of people thinking, oh, she's not very good at that, or she clearly hasn't refined that skill. I think, showing a little bit of behind the scenes of like, oh, I'm still learning this. It's not quite great yet. But most people look at that and they say, oh, that's way better than I could have done, So like when you take the time and you're just at home and you're practicing this as a hobby, like that's time that other people are spending doing other things. And so they're impressed with what you've been able to do. And so I think, the way that my business and the marketing and the things that I'm sharing have changed is I'm sharing more behind the scenes stuff. I'm sharing more of the art that I create that I probably wouldn't normally show. And I'm also predominantly sharing work that would fit in the context of a mural, because that's what the jobs that I'm looking to get now. Like I'll create something digitally, but I'll mock it up onto a wall so people could see, oh, that's what that would look like if it was a mural, even if it didn't end up becoming a job yet. That's the type of stuff you could do. Like, even if you haven't done a mural yet, if that's something you want to do, like create a mock-up of like what a mural could look like and say, hey, like, look how cool this mural would be if it was on the side of whatever. Like I've been doing some cool mock-ups on the sides of some of Iowa State's buildings. I did like a mock-up on the side of Parks Library. I was like, look, there's this big concrete wall. How cool would it be if there's a mural here, And like people look at that and it's easier for them to like visualize what it could potentially look like. Yeah.
What was like the scariest part of just simply getting started? Like what was like the moment you decided I want to make this a business?
I think I was fortunate that I had the foresight to start while I was still in school. So it was a little bit less scary that way. I also feel like I kind of was taking baby steps along the way. Like the YouTube channel was a very low risk thing that I did to start. And I said like, well, there's no harm in just like posting some videos, that slowly grew. There's no harm in doing a few freelance projects here and there. There's no harm in like saying yes to a project, like maybe I'm not ready for, but I can Google it and figure out how to do it. The scariest part was probably graduating from college and saying like, I know that I want to do this full time. I'm not technically making enough money to be financially smartly doing this full time, but I'd saved up enough money where I was like, okay, I have this buffer. And interesting things happen when you give yourself that ultimatum of saying like, you either make money doing this or you're not going to be able to pay your rent. Like you kind of, when you put yourself into a situation where you're on the line and you're on the hook with yourself, like you kind of just make it happen, and it doesn't always come in like the exact way you thought it would. Like I didn't think I was going to get that mural job like 5 months after college, but I did. Like I was open to those different possibilities. So like it was scary. I wasn't quite sure how it was going to work out at first, but I was very open to like just saying yes to every opportunity. If someone wanted me to do wedding invitations, I was like, sure, yeah, I'll do it. If someone wanted me to do a mural, I was like, yes, I'll do it. Like just kind of being willing and open. I think that's part of being a freelancer and being an artist, is that people will approach you with projects that aren't necessarily stuff that you expected to do or that you've done in the past, but you kind of know that you can figure it out because you're like, oh, I've done these things that are kind of similar. And if I say yes to this opportunity, that widens my portfolio and, you know, it gives me more experience. Like a couple of months ago, someone approached me and said, I have these vintage Volkswagen car doors that I want to have some like lettering painted on. Like, is that something you do? And I'm like, well, not in the past, but I can surely figure it out. You know, like, you know, people will just kind of say like, I don't know where else to go. Like, I bet Lauren could figure this out. And I was like, well, I guess that's just my reputation now. So I kind of just, anything that has to do with lettering or, you know, graphic design on like a strange surface, like kind of just figure it out along the way. So, yeah. I forgot to ask, how long are we going? Do we have a?
11:30, we got.
Okay, cool. Good to know. Okay, I'm gonna erase this and draw some more stuff up here. Let's see. I think I have a clean. So one of the other things that I wanted to introduce you guys to, which it's more of an advanced technique, I guess, but you can do it easily without calligraphy pens, is flourishing. And it's one of my favorite aspects of calligraphy because it allows you to create stuff that's super custom looking. And this is probably easier done with like a phrase. So like if we take a phrase like, I don't know, let's say like, you inspire me. I like to start out by just writing it out. And the goal of flourishing is to kind of elongate the letters, fill in the negative space, and create like a really kind of custom looking artwork. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take any of these lines that are sort of unfinished, and I'm going to continue carrying them on. And I don't know what a better word for it would be other than to flourish it. You know, you're curving your pen, you're letting it flow. There's really no rules when it comes to flourishing, but it's really fun because you can just really just let your hand flow and take it. And once you're done, like you're going to end up with this really cool, like, I don't know, very custom looking artwork that like looks very artistic. It looks very like creative looking. And you just kind of take it and run with it. This is one of my favorite things to do if I'm ever bored. I'll just give myself a phrase and just challenge myself to kind of flourish it. And I'll do like several iterations of it. And you can see this looks cool without even doing actual calligraphy, just using cursive letters, or even you could do this with block letters. And then if you want to, you can go in and sort of thicken each of these strokes. This is usually one of the last things that I teach in my calligraphy class because people are very intimidated by it. It's like, oh, that looks scary and hard. And it's hard to get it just right, but when you kind of give yourself the freedom to just experiment, it's really fun.
So Lauren, how did you like perfect your penmanship enough to feel like you were ready to do lettering?
I never feel perfected. I think I'm always comparing myself to artists who are better than me. So in my head, I'm like, if you guys could see the professionals, you know, the professionals, like you would not think of me as so talented. But I think I'm lucky enough that it's just like something I love to do. Like if I have a free afternoon, like I might go for a bike ride, or I might just spend a couple of hours just doing this for fun. I think like that's like the like untold secret of being a good artist, is just spending a lot of time doing it and making stuff that's bad. And then you're like, ooh, that was bad, but I can tell what's bad about it. So I know the next time, like, I don't do that. Like maybe like I would accidentally overcrowd myself here. And I'm like, okay, I know that I don't like the look of that. So the next time I go back and I take that away and I iterate and I do something else. Like that's been like that's been the way that I'm able to create like my style, but also sort of perfect my art, is just like I make so much stuff. And I guess as an artist, you believe that you have this taste of what is good. So you kind of just start refining and saying, okay, that line was too thick. Next time I'll make it thinner. I like this angle better, just like small stuff like that. And that's like those small changes that you make kind of add up to the difference between like a beginner and like someone who's more of like a professional artist.
So what do you look for when you're creating things? How do you decide like, yes, that's good, yes, that's not? And do you ever come back to things and say, oh, wait, never mind?
Yes, like I'll look at stuff that I made like 2 months ago and I'm like, what was I thinking? Like that looks terrible. I think sometimes like when you're making stuff like, and this is like probably not applicable to everyone who doesn't do art, but like stepping away from it and coming at it with like fresh eyes is like a big thing, where like if I were to make this piece of art and I look at it right now and I say, I love how that looks, I'm done. Like I may step away from it and come back to it an hour with fresh eyes and I see it in a totally different light. Like maybe before I was focusing on this, and when I come back with fresh eyes, I see this top part is clearly at the wrong angle and I'm able to adjust that. Sometimes what I also do is I'll flip stuff upside down. Like if I'm working digitally, it's really easy. Like I'll just take it and I'll just flip it upside down. And for some reason that allows you to see errors. I think it's a little bit of that fresh eyes thing too, where I'm really attentive to like spacing and like where the negative space is in a piece. So when I flip something upside down, it allows me to very quickly see, oh, something is way too far to the right, or I need to add more space in between these two letters. Like that's one of the little tricks I've just kind of figured out, is like when I flip something upside down, I can see it more clearly and more objectively, because like I'm not reading the words, I'm just like looking at the composition. I feel like composition is like one of the things that comes last when you're learning lettering or like any kind of art, is like you can learn how to create the letters, you can learn, how to do flourishing and how to get the strokes just right, but like composing a piece and how it looks overall to like a fresh pair of eyes, like that's kind of what comes last, and it's like sort of the hardest part, I think. So you guys have other questions?
What was your favorite piece that you've made so far, like the most fun project that you've done?
The most fun project, and one that will probably sit in like my heart forever, is like the most special project, was a mural that I did downtown in Ames. It's like a big blue mural. It says Ames, and then there's words surrounding it, kind of describing like the different awesome attributes that Ames has. And that project was special for me because at the time it was like the biggest mural I'd ever done. It's an outdoor mural that gets a lot of exposure, so that's really fun. Like I had like even my mail carrier left a note in my mailbox, and she said, I love your mural, I see it every day. And like that to me was like, that's the reason I love mural art, because it makes such a big impact on people. And like in a selfish way, I love that, because it's like, oh, lots of people are seeing my art and they think it's cool, but also just public beautification has become a huge passion of mine that I never realized that I would have. Like turning a blank surface that used to be something boring into something notable that people want to walk up to and take pictures next to. Like I was at the dentist the other day, and my dentist was like, did you paint that, blue mural on Main Street? I was like, yeah. She's like, oh, I love that mural. I took my maternity pictures in front of it, like stuff like that, where, people just say like, oh, that has a special place in my mind too. So it's like something that I love that other people kind of like attach to. And now it's a piece of the community. It becomes this piece of art that's like, has a weird space in this community. And Ames is actually, like I've discovered, it's a very tight knit community in a really cool way, like especially downtown, like all the business owners know each other. They get very attached to the landscape, the way it looks. And I remember like people told me this before I painted that mural, which is like, once a piece of art makes its way onto Main Street or to a community like this, it can be very controversial when it eventually would come time to taking it down, or should it be repaired, and should it live on? Like I didn't realize that when people have a strong connection to their local community, that includes the physical buildings and the way a space looks. And I had never had that, because where I grew up in Cedar Rapids, I never quite had that connection to like necessarily the downtown place or like what it looked like. And when something new would pop up, I'd be like, oh, that's cool, but I don't necessarily have an emotional connection with it. But like, that's something I've learned is a lot of people here, I think because maybe it's a smaller community and because it's got history, like people become very tied to pieces of art, maybe sculpture, maybe murals that like make their way onto Main Street. And like, it would be cool to think like in 10 years, I could come back and still see that artwork living on. Like, obviously that's my hope, but it was not my intention from the onset to create something that like people like really fixate on. But now that's become the reason that I really like to do what I do. So yeah, it's really cool when you have unexpected consequences of like something you already enjoy doing. It's cool. Yeah.
So now we need to just see like blank walls anywhere. That's all the first thing that comes to mind.
Exactly. I'm like, how would I make that look better? Like, that's what I was doing. I was like walking around campus because I love creating mural mockups as a part of my portfolio so I can continue growing my portfolio even when I'm not doing projects. And like, you can buy stock photos of blank walls. And I was like, what if I just walked around campus and just every time I saw a wall that I was like, ooh, that could use a mural, I would just take a picture and then I can create mockups based on that. And it's a little bit more personal, you know? So I think like, yes, once you start doing that, your brain just starts to see opportunity all the time. Like I just dream about it now, you know, like I love it. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's see. I'm trying to come up with one more thing to teach. How did you guys like Flourishing? Was that kind of fun to play around with? It's something you get better and better at as you go. Maybe now I will do a little bit on like block lettering combined with calligraphy because I love mixing different fonts. Something that like once you get a little bit more comfortable working with it, like it can be really, really fun to mix block lettering with calligraphy, and that like a juxtaposition of different fonts is really cool. So one of the cool things to do when you're like lettering a quote or something is you can write it out and identify like what are like the most standout words in this quote, and like you can write them a little bit bigger to give them emphasis. You can, you know, draw them in like a really cool font. You can sort of alternate between these two different fonts. So like you can even add Flourishing onto block letters as well too. Like I remember I was doing like sidewalk lettering. That's like one of the things I like to do in my free time last year. And I was having a lot of fun playing around with like doing Flourishing on block lettering because it's like kind of unexpected. You take a font that's like maybe more stoic and you kind of give it some personality. So that's something also that's really fun to play around with. And obviously you can tell like I'm not planning any of this out, but like it kind of still works. Like there's really endless stuff that you can do, and you can kind of keep it more simple. You can just keep going with it forever if you want. Another thing you can do is add drop shadows. It's really hard to demonstrate because I have one color. But say you're lettering in like a dark color and you want to add a three-dimensional element to your lettering. You can just make a thin line. Like I always usually go down and to the right. It's just easiest for me to remember. But like imagine like maybe this was written in red or purple and I took a yellow marker and just add a really thin line down and to the right of each of your strokes. And it helps give it sort of more of a three-dimensional aspect. Like that's a really easy way that you can add a more advanced look to your lettering. You can also like, I love adding just little like stars and different elements to frame it in, you know, if it looks a little bit too empty. stuff that kind of seems simple, but like when you really play around with the placement of it, it can add a lot and it can help you kind of fill in that like negative space that's there.
Lauren, did you ever do like art and classes and things like that, or are you totally self-taught?
I never took an art class in college, I don't think. And like, that's one of the most common questions I get asked is like, what classes should I take in college to like prepare me to be an artist? And I was like, ooh, I didn't take any of those. So you can totally be self-taught. I mean, I think it's actually been one of the bigger benefits to me because I have more of a business background in education. It helps me think like a business person. And then since my passion is art, I never have any problem like sitting down and like kind of learning new like ways that I can advance in that direction. So it's probably different for everyone, but I'm actually grateful to have more of a business background because I think what I've heard from people who are trained in art or in design is that they don't really get the opportunity to learn how to necessarily monetize that. There's not a lot of education around like how to be a good business person while you're an artist. And I would say like the background I have in marketing and sales is probably more important than my artistic background in a lot of ways, is because I know that I'm not the best artist. Like I know that I'm not the best letterer or the best graphic designer, but because I have that sales background and marketing background, knowing that when you connect with the right people at the right time, they don't care that you're not the best. Like, you know, like I mentioned before, you don't have to be like the best artist to sell your art. You know, you just have to be impressive enough to someone who has not trained in that at all, and like they'll still think that your stuff is really, really good, you know, like clearly not my best work, but you know, someone might look at that and say, oh, that's so cool, I couldn't do that. And so I think like that's one of the lessons I've had to learn, is that I know that I don't need to be the best artist. I don't put the pressure on myself to be the best artist, but I do need to be able to sell myself, and I need to be able to put myself out there and market myself in order to, you know, sell my work. And luckily, like through social media, there's an easy avenue to do that. You know, it's easier now to share what you do with people. And if people like what you do, they follow you and they'll start recommending you. And that's been really cool. Like referrals are really cool. But I would say I've learned everything I need to know about art through YouTube videos and through Googling stuff. And, you know, hopefully that's empowering to someone who maybe is watching this and they're thinking, I'm not trained as a designer formally. You know, no one really asks you for your resume. No one cares if you even went to college. Like if you have a portfolio of work that is good, like it doesn't really matter how you got there necessarily. So I know you guys are both like in agriculture and you're in business, and it's like no one really cares like how you get to the point of where you are. It's kind of cool when people ask me like, oh, where did you train in art school? I'm like, oh, I'm self-taught artist. They think it's kind of cool. You know, it's like more relatable, I guess. Yeah.
Do you guys have any other questions? We're down to the last 10 minutes, so I have a few more, but let you guys.
I just feel like out of curiosity, do you think you're gonna stay in Iowa, or do you want to like move out of the Midwest or something?
No, I don't plan to stay in Iowa. I'm grateful for having grown up here and to also have started here. There's not necessarily a huge art scene here, at least not from like what I've gathered, but in a way that's kind of worked to my benefit. Like I'm grateful to kind of be able to be the artsy person in the room and to be able to bring that element to Ames and leave my mark here. I think maybe if I was growing up in a place where I felt like there were so many other mural artists, for example, I might be intimidated and kind of feel not as excited about like putting my work out there because I would really be comparing myself to other people. So I think there's been a huge benefit to growing up here and to feeling like I'm kind of unique and more special as being an artist, but I definitely am looking to move out to the West Coast. That's kind of like where my heart calls me to. Warmer weather, more of an artsy scene, but yeah. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I know I've talked a lot.
how do you overcome the fear that kind of comes with doing your own thing?
Oh, everyone probably has fear attached to it in different ways. For me, it's not like a fear of like, oh, what if I fail, or like, oh, what if this artwork comes out bad? For me, it's, oh, there's always a little twinge of fear when I'm like selling myself to a client, or if I get really attached to a project and it falls through. Like that's kind of the fear that I have, that I'm always working through, is learning to not get too attached to any one version of success that I've like painted as this ultimate picture in my head. Like if I apply for this one huge project and I just get my heart set on it and it doesn't go through, like not letting that crush me and just like, make me upset. And also not feeling so intimidated to put myself out there and to sell my services to people. Like selling has this really weird like connotation of being gross and uncomfortable. And I definitely like battle with that because it's so important. And I think there is just this image of like with an artist, if you're good enough, the clients are just going to come to you. Projects are just going to be flowing into your inbox. Like you shouldn't have to work for it. And I think like it's a very privileged mindset that, if you're just a good enough artist, that people are going to find you. The truth is it's a really crowded space. And also not a lot of people know where to look for creative people. So when I email someone cold out of the blue and maybe they've been looking for an artist, like that's the best feeling in the world. And that's like the redeeming part of sales that kind of keeps me going and like pulls me through to the other side. Cause I may send like 100 messages to people who are like, no, I'm not interested. But then that one person is like, yes, I was looking for a mural artist. I'm so glad that you reached out to me. And like that kind of pulls me through to the other side and reminds me like, it's okay. You don't have to be scared and fearful of this. It's just, it's a numbers game and it's a process. And, eventually you will connect with that right person and that'll kind of help you overcome that fear of putting yourself out there.
How do you like reach out to like people? Like you said, you'd email to like hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And have one people come back. Do you normally do that? Like you reach out to like businesses or communities or?
Oh, I'm constantly doing it. It's like a part of my like weekly routine now. And that's like one of the biggest surprises. That was like one of the biggest shocks to me is that, oh, that's just a part of being a business owner is marketing. Like, as an artist, you have this mindset of like, oh, I'm good. Like people will just find me. Just like, it's not how it works. So yeah, outreach has become a part of my like weekly process as a business owner. And, it's something as simple as like, you see a shop, down the street that needs a new sign and you email them and say, hey, would you like me to paint a sign for you? And it can be as big as, Googling like what are public art projects that I can apply for that have, larger budgets, or, one of the categories I'm doing outreach right now is murals for like middle and elementary schools. So like, it's literally as like simple as like making a spreadsheet of like a list of all of the elementary schools that probably have a bigger budget. Maybe it's a private school or like, businesses you would think have a larger budget for artwork, and just finding the email address and sending an email, introducing yourself and saying, here's my work, here's what I do. Like, are you interested in my services? And just knowing that not everyone's going to get back to you or not everyone's going to be interested, but you may end up connecting with that one person who is. And it's like, it feels really scary and intimidating at first because you're like, what if this person doesn't want to see my message? And it's like, well, then they're just not the right person for you at that time, So yeah, it's kind of as simple as that. And also as complicated as like figuring out what direction, like you have endless possibilities. Like who would I possibly reach out to? You just kind of start somewhere and go from there. Yeah.
What would you say for somebody who is doing art, like maybe as a hobby, but they think they might want to monetize that? Like, what would you say? Here's how you should start.
I would say start by sharing your work online and just seeing the response you get from it. That can really help you hone in on like what your special thing is. If you're a lettering artist and you start like posting a few pictures of your lettering and someone says, oh, I love that one piece you did that says, peace, love, happiness. And, it has that special font. You say, oh, okay, maybe people are more drawn to this. And you just keep sharing it. And whatever you notice that people are more drawn to, like you could start doing more of that. And like, that's how you could kind of refine and find your niche. And like, eventually maybe someone will approach you with a project and that could be, your first freelance gig, but it's it's really impossible for people to know that you want to start making money from it if you're not actively sharing it. You know, people can't read your mind. So if you are looking to start a business, like just tell as many people as you can, like, hey, I'm a lettering artist, I'm a photographer, I'm a painter, you know, and you'll start to make those connections, and people want to help you make that dream a reality. If they know someone who knows someone who's looking for a painter, like they will want to connect you and be that person that like helps you book your first job. So yeah, just share what you're doing. It's like the best way.
You do a really good job of showing up online. And was that something that always came natural, or did you have to kind of overcome any kind of like discomfort?
Yeah, I still am. I never know if I'm sharing the right things. I guess there is no way to know that. I'm naturally very shy. And even just like speaking, it's always a little bit of like reminding myself, like, it's okay. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? But yeah, I think sharing your art, it's a little bit easier because it's not your face, you know? So like putting a post out there with like a piece of artwork you made, like, yes, you're opening up to criticism, but the truth is like most people are very kind. I don't think I've ever gotten a negative comment on like a piece of art that I've made. More people are more willing to kind of criticize you on like when you're, you know, talking to the camera, or like when you're saying something. Like, luckily people are very, very kind when it comes to, you know, you putting your artwork out there, and generally people love to be supportive and like tell you how cool it is. So I think, you know, if you're nervous about like sharing those few early pieces of art that you made, like maybe you made your first lettering piece and you're proud of it, but you know it's like not the best, like just say, hey, I made this, like I'm a new lettering artist, I'm just trying this out, like what do you guys think? And just see what happens. Like people are very, very nice, honestly, is what I've found, luckily. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
We're down to the last few minutes. So
Okay.
you want to make sure we wrap up the right way?
Okay, well, usually I end by, you know, saying if you want to follow me or find me online, I'm pretty much everywhere. So you can find longer form videos on YouTube. Just search Lauren Liz, I'll come up. That's where all of my tutorial videos live. I have a lot of vlogs also. It's kind of like a day in the life, like follow me around, like what do I actually do during the day? If you're interested in that, that's where you can find that. On Instagram, I'm sharing much more frequent updates. So like, what art piece am I currently working on? Where is my style sort of going? I like to be very candid on there and, you know, share a lot through posts and through stories. My website is where my portfolio lives. So if you want to see like the more higher quality work that I'm putting out, that I'm like sharing with clients, letterwithlaurenliz.com. And I think that's it.
Maybe do a shout out for your like materials for people who are wanting to.
Oh yeah. And if you're wanting to really dive deeply into calligraphy and you want to learn, I have a book and also like a complete kit, and that's through my Etsy shop. So again, if you just search Letter with Lauren Liz, it'll pop up. It's probably the second or third link. So that's where you can go if you want to dive really deeply into specifically calligraphy and lettering and stuff like that. But my YouTube channel is the best place to start if you just want a little free way to kind of get more into it.
Awesome.
Cool.
Any last questions from you? Oh, no? Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us.
Yeah.
This was super fun. So thanks for the great questions. And Lauren, you're always so wonderful. So thank you.
This is so fun. Thank you guys for being here. And I hope that you took something away today that you can use.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome.
Bye.